So this morning's session is a listening session on cultural appropriation and racism and the impacts on Indigenous youth and communities. So this is an academic conference. I'm a professor here at the university. I just sit in a dusty library and talk about old things all the time. No, I'm just kidding. Do you ever see Indiana Jones? That's what I do. I just left my bullwhip in my office. I'm just kidding. You probably don't even know who Indiana Jones is. The American Indian Studies Association Conference, the Native American Studies Department here at the University of New Mexico, we don't just teach college students, we don't just work in dusty libraries, but we try to do a lot of work in the communities. And one thing that is especially concerning for us as educators, just like your high school teachers, the people you work with at the high school, is that we're concerned about younger generations and what's happening in high schools, and middle schools, and elementary schools. And we have a lot of professionals here at the university who work in education. And if anyone is familiar with what happened, how many of you have heard about the Cibola incident that happened at the Cibola High School? Yeah, so we had two Native high school students who were assaulted by a white teacher in a classroom. And it wasn't just a random kind of act of violence or insult or slur, but it was directed specifically towards Native students. And we have one of those students here today. And so this conversation that we're hoping to have with you is really to kind of flesh out what you're experiencing at your high schools, but also, first and foremost, to show support for the Cibola students who are undergoing this kind of racism and the issues that are going on in their school. And so I want to introduce our facilitators, because we have some really phenomenal facilitators. A lot of you didn't make it to the movie last night. Did anybody from the high schools make it to the film showing on More Than a Word? Well, so we have two stars from that film. We have Amanda Blackhorse. If you want to stand up and wave. We also have John Little, who's a filmmaker and also a whole student. And then from here in the university, the Native American Studies Department, we have Tiffany Lee. And from our UNM student group, Kiva Club, we have the president, Jennifer Marley. And then last but not least, we have Mackenzie Johnson from Cibola High School here. So. And I'll turn the mic over to...
So I think, thanks for coming and teachers for bringing the students. I know field trips are hard nowadays in schools. So thank you for all of you for being here and wanting to participate. I think we wanted to start a dialogue about some of the issues around your own perspectives of what your education is like at your school, but also learning from what other Native American students experience in other schools, particularly related to, for example, the incident at Cibola High School, which was really rooted in a lot of institutionalized racism and perspectives about who Native people are, or not really recognizing Native people as humans. So I'm not really sure how to begin the dialogue, but maybe just opening up a question about, for any of you, what do you think is racism? How would you define that? Or maybe you have an example of where you've seen that, not necessarily a personal one, but something you've seen or observed.
An example would be what happened at Washington, and when that white teenager went up to that elderly guy while he was singing on the drum. I think that's a form of racism.
Yeah, good example. Does everyone know what she's referring to? It was shared widely and made national news. The elder who was singing, who was actually, I think, trying to defuse the situation, but then the white teenagers were mocking him and really showing him a lot of disrespect. And yeah, that comes from a place of how did they see him as an elder? Did they see him as a human being or as an elder, or were there racial perceptions making them judge and act out in that way based on that, their racial perceptions of him? Someone else have another example of something you've observed, or how you want to define what is racism, or how you?
One example that I've seen is in Ontario or Canada, with the students going into Thunder Bay. They have to leave the reservation to the school, and then they get calls with names. They get people trying to drown them in the river.
So the school that they go to is predominantly non-native. Good example. Thank you for sharing. From northern. You know, about 10 years ago, I did a research study with several colleagues where we went to 13 high schools across New Mexico and talked with students about their experiences in school. And we wanted to get an idea from them about what did they envision as being an ideal education, a great education. And it was really hard for a lot of them to articulate what that looked like, because they had never been asked that before, what was a great education. And a lot of them had stories. This is over 200 students that we had, interviewed with focus groups, had stories about how they've been mistreated or misunderstood, or even in the curriculum that there wasn't a place for them, even if they went to a school that had a majority of Native American students. So I'm just going to pass it off now to another facilitator to sort of maybe carry on the
So I guess
discussion.
we'll do like a quick introduction, and then I think we might break up in small groups. So I'm John Little. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Minnesota. My family is from Standing Rock, but I grew up in Denver and then also South Dakota. And so, and I'm also the co-director. Me and my brother made a film called More Than a Word, kind of challenging Native mascots, in particular, looking at the Washington.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amanda Blackhorse, and I'm Dene. I'm a Shinham, born from Tachini, Titnajini on my chains, and a Shin on my willies. And I'm originally from Big Mountain. Does anyone know where Big Mountain is in Arizona? A couple people in Kienta or K-Town? K-Town, Monument Valley. So that's where I'm from, and I actually came here from Phoenix. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you guys. I was a part of a case against the Washington NFL team to get rid of their name and their logo. And that actually started when I was like 24 years old. And now I think I'm 37, 36? I don't remember. After 35, I forget. And so I started out when I was really young, and I was just really learning a lot about what racism is and colonialism, because I was in college, and so I know sometimes it can be really difficult to understand, but there's a lot of research out there, there's a lot of people that you can turn to, especially like here at the university. I know there's a lot of groups in the community as well that you can look to for information about it. It can be really confusing, because I remember when I was younger, when I was in high school, one of our principal at the school, who's a white principal, he said he was Cherokee, but we don't know if he really was or not. And he called us stupid Indians. Like, we were all in our school this is on the res, like in the middle of the deep res. We were in an assembly like this, there's a lot of students, and he called us, someone put graffiti in the boys' bathroom and on the stall, and so he yelled at all of us for that, and he called us a bunch of stupid Indians. And I remember when that happened, I was so shocked. I was like, what the heck? I can't believe he just said that. And then, but nobody said anything. It was complete silence. And even the teacher, I was looking at the teachers like, is someone going to say something? And no one said anything. But I know people were feeling some type of way about it. I knew people didn't like it, but they were afraid to say something. I was afraid to say something too. And the first thing that came out of my mouth was white trash. Like, it just came out, and maybe that wasn't the best thing to say at that time. And then someone else said something across the room, and then they broke up the assembly. But I think that in those moments we have to lean on each other, and we have to talk to one another, and it's okay to express how you feel, and don't be afraid. And as I got older, I learned how to not be afraid, and how to speak up, and how to how to stand up for myself and stand up for our people. Because sometimes it only takes one person to say something. So after that, some of the students organized a walkout, and we walked out of the school. And school was shut down for 3 days, and the parents got involved after that. And they barricaded the entrance to the school, and they wouldn't let the buses through until the principal apologized, and he eventually resigned from the school. So you guys have a lot of power together, and you can do that too. And I'm just really sorry about what happened in the community. I know it's really tough. So I'm available for support. I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, like Twitter. Just look me up. I'm available if you guys need that moral support. Thank you.
Mackenzie Johnson Good morning, everybody. My name is Mackenzie Johnson, and just a speaker here, high school student, junior at Cibola High School.
Obviamente, sem tão na escola Jennifer Marley, na vida eu como na boa família comum. My name is Jennifer Marley. I'm from the Pueblo San Ildefonso, and as they mentioned, I'm currently UN Cuba Club's president. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about how these two issues that you've heard been brought up, one of them being racist mascots and the other being racism in schools, are related. And I'd like to call back to how in starting in 2015 to 2017, another group that I'm with called the Red Nation was involved in protests to abolish the Santa Fe Entrada. Who here has heard of that one? That protest came about early in the 60s, so it had been being protested for a really long time, but a lot of people don't really know that history. It was first protested by Pueblo governors because of the racist imagery depicted. For those of you who don't know what it is, it was a reenactment of the so-called bloodless reconquest that happened after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. And that is blatant revisionist history, meaning history that is altered because the reconquest certainly was not bloodless. Over 70 Pueblo warriors were hung when the conquistador de Vargas returned after the Pueblo Revolt. And their wives and children were distributed to his men as slaves. So it had been long contested, but what really revived that movement now was related to the movement to abolish all racist imagery here in the Southwest and revisionist history. And so one of the big things that kicked that off was the removal of UNM's racist seal here, which was successful. It's finally removed, and that depicted a conquistador and a frontiersman representing the double conquest here in New Mexico of first Spanish colonialism and U.S. settler colonialism. And so it's important to understand that all of these movements are really interconnected and are apart from each other. In tandem with the move to abolish the racist seal, we are seeing the abolition of Harvard's racist seal that belonged to a slave-owning family, the abolition of the Confederate flag, and so on. And so in 2017, the year that really pushed to get the Entrada finally abolished, among our demands, which a lot of people don't realize, we had a list of very specific political demands outside of just the abolition of the reenactment itself. Those included the prohibition of the Fiestas Council from traveling to and giving presentations at schools. And so what they would do is they would go and have the reenactment in schools. They have a big assembly where there's these men dressed up like conquistadors, they're dancing with the kids and giving out prizes. And this is before most children are even required to take any kind of New Mexico history curriculum. So that imagery is already sitting with them, and it's always presented in really like celebratory, upbeat fashion. And even though the Entrada has been abolished, the Fiestas Council, or Las Caballeros de Vargas, the group that actually does it, still travels to schools now. So our chapter, Red Nation Santa Fe, is actually spearheading efforts to remove these assemblies in schools. And in addition to that, one of the original demands included with that was to replace the Fiestas Council curriculum that's being presented at public schools with Pueblo-driven curriculum. And that already exists. There's actually a Pueblo-driven curriculum that's being used at the Santa Fe Indian School. And so this isn't just about representation and imagery, it's also about what's actually being taught, and it's actually about how history is constantly rewritten in favor of the conqueror and the colonizer, and how that really changes, even for Native people, our perceptions and our understandings of our place in history and our place now. Because when we're only presented with revisionist history, we don't really have anything else to go off in understanding our history as Native people. And so, from those demands, we're continuing to push them forward, and we're doing this, we're aligning ourselves with the struggle that the students at Cibola High School are pushing right now, because they're very much related. And right now, New Mexico is undergoing a full curriculum change. So we're going to be pushing these efforts, and I think right now is a really pivotal time where I think we're going to see a lot of successes. And that's why it's really important to pay attention when these instances of racist violence happen in schools, because it's reflective of not only that individual and their bad character, it's a reflection of the entire system. It's a reflection of the curriculum that's in schools and the common narratives that are just upheld by everyday people. So it's just important to bear in mind that these aren't individual instances, they're all related. So I hope we can talk a little bit more about that when we break it out. Thank you.
Awesome. So before we break out, I want to open the mic up to any of the students. If you have a question for the panelists or the facilitators, or you just have a comment about what you've heard so far, if you want to say something.
Yeah, it's Shannon Johnson. I'm the mother of Mackenzie Johnson. Twitchi initially do Sanchi in a Bush's chain, do Twit something doesn't chain. Dog can the Chide Dashanala, the Saber that gave me a Igasina shop. I am from the Bitterwater clan and originally from Cibola Delhi, Arizona, which is a small community between the Hopi Reservation and Winslow, Arizona. So I thank you all, high school students and faculty, for being here today to hear about racism and how we all need to come together to stop what's happening to our people. One of the things that I reflect back on when this first happened to Mackenzie is that I had to make two choices. One, I could have easily just thrown a lawsuit at APS, and they would have kind of, I guess, decided how much money they would have paid us out, for our pain and suffering, and nothing would ever have changed. The second is to go in to do the whole due process with APS and just follow what they had to, I guess, tell us what needed to get done, and in return we had dialogue with them. And I chose the second route only because I wanted to make systemic changes for you students and for future generations, because for the past 2 years we have been, in my hall and cohort here, we have been talking about making positive changes, and they were preparing us for being Indigenous leaders for a lot of the schools that are transitioning from BIE to Bureau of Indian Education schools to tribal control schools. And so with that, we were coming up with a lot of ideas on how we can transform schools to challenge Native students. Because in my eyes, I feel like Native students are far smarter than non-Natives in a sense, because you all get a different experience living on the reservation. For instance, Mackenzie here, probably since the age of, when she was a toddler, on her dad's side, we have sheep. And so early on, she's seen butchering happen. Probably when she was 3 years old is probably when she started seeing it. And with that, a lot of Navajo kids also experience that. So really, we see the environment as our laboratory. And as early as 3 years old, Mackenzie was already understanding anatomy. So they would point at the lungs and she would be told what the function of that is, and also about the liver, the kidneys. And so then when she enters school, you know, they're giving cute little books about sheep. You know, they kind of dumb it down, saying this is a sheep. The sheep is white. The sheep's wool is soft. And so she's already surpassed that. She's already touched it. She's already felt the wool. She's known about sheep for a while now. And so that's how I see Native children, is that you guys have a lot of experiential learning in the world. And when you come here into school, you may be bored. Who knows? Because I think that long ago, our grandmothers and grandfathers didn't just sit us in the hogan and give us worksheets to do and say, that's your education. You were taught to haul woods, and the little boys were taught what areas of land you should be hauling woods, what type of wood you should be hauling, and even sheep herding. You're told what type of herbs or what plants the sheep should stay away from, or at this time where they should be, where you should be herding the sheep. And even differentiating the different type of plants you have there. Is it medicinal? Is it edible? Is it used for tea? Is it used to dye wool? So you are botanists also early on. And even just a lot of the rug weaving, what goes into it, the mathematical thought, the symmetry, the different geometric shapes. And these aren't drawn or planned out, it's all in the head. So there is a lot going on, you know, in our way of teaching. And so I think when you think about future education, we need to start thinking about how important it is to keep that identity of ourselves intact, while we try to also learn about the Western education side. And when you blend them together, that's just going to benefit you. So I think the schooling experience, we all know that the number one goal is to assimilate all of us. And once you lose your language, when you lose your culture, you know, I was once told long ago, probably when I was your age, that why would you be ashamed of who you are? If the holy people wanted you to be non-native, you would have been born non-native. You were chosen to be a Diné or an indigenous person from the holy people, because you are tough enough to go through life with that, because you can't wash that brown away. So through schooling, you know, losing the language, losing the culture, that was the number one goal. Because right now, I think when you look at one another and don't know a whole lot about your identity, then you just have to think that you're just a brown person without the knowledge that should be benefiting you. Because we have ceremony, we have our songs, we have our dances, our prayers, a lot of things that we contributed through history, even that's not even documented in most of our history books. So not only the Navajo code talkers, but there's also a lot of indigenous tribes that also used the language during World War II to overcome the Japanese. And even with that, like, we also understand the water that's within the Navajo land is also supplying water resources to larger communities, larger urban areas, Las Vegas, Phoenix, LA, Denver, all over, but yet we don't have that access yet on our own land. There's a lot of grandmothers and grandfathers out there that do not have running water. And what happened a couple of years ago with the Gold King mine, the spill there, how it also impacted our lands, and now with fracking. So the state of New Mexico really got a lot of money out of that, a lot of revenue from the oil and gas that was being extracted from our indigenous lands. And I'm not sure if you high school students understand, but that's the entity, that's the department that actually pays for the textbooks, the oil and gas industry. And so they're the ones who are deciding what curriculum should be bought. So of course, they're gonna buy a curriculum that's pro-fracking, letting you know that it's good for our environment, but yet it's destroying our water. So really, take your studies seriously, because we do need your help to make positive changes. And in the meantime, I'm going to do my best to make changes here at APS. So if we can do it with the largest school district here in New Mexico, of course the smaller districts are just going to follow suit. So I'm going to continue the fight.
Right, so
thank you all.
the adults are done talking. So everyone is sitting at a table, right? So I hope you like the people that are sitting at your table. If you don't, you can. But we want to ask a question. So this is where you all participate. And first of all, if you guys have a pen and paper, maybe you can write this down. We want to know, where are you from and why did you come here today? And then the other question that we have, and our facilitators will walk around and kind of help you with this one, is, have you experienced, and this is just for students, so that if the students could just have their own tables. I know adults like to hang out with young people and really relive their glory days in high school, but if we could just have the students at their own tables. So the questions for the students that we have are, one, have you encountered a racist incident at your school, from another individual student, or from a teacher? And how did that make you feel? And what was done to address it? So we'll let you all talk amongst yourselves. And if you want to do a little report back, we can do a report back to the entire group and discuss it. But Dr. Lee, Amanda, John, and Jennifer, and Mackenzie will be rubber banding around. So remember, I want to know where you're from. And so pick somebody to report back to the rest of the group.
Okay, so I just want to make a few clarifications. So I'm talking to some people, and if it's an incident that happened outside of school grounds or off that too, we can write about that. Because I mean, these things still impact you as a high school student. I realize a lot of people in here, they're all native schools, and so a lot of times it's harder to come up with things like that. But that doesn't leave you free from racism when you're leaving or off campus. So I think kind of think through some of those incidents too. Border towns, yeah, think about border towns.
So border towns, like, Albuquerque is a border town, right? It borders the Indian, indigenous, I mean, this is all indigenous territory, but, you know, if you grew up in a town where, you know, there's a large percentage of natives and then a large percentage of non-natives, a lot of times there's a lot of racism, overt racism, and so Albuquerque, I think, is one, Flagstaff, Phoenix even, Santa Fe, Gallup. These are all, I think, border towns where a lot of the racism, and it doesn't happen with just people saying racist things to you. It could happen economically, where they push out native businesses, where it's hard to start a native business. It could happen politically with politicians, not supporting native politicians. There's so many different ways that it could happen. So think about border town and border town.
All right, so let's get back into a big group. So do you want to share kind of what you talked about?
My name is Audrey. I go to school at Cibola Community School. I played basketball with the team, and I went to Camaro to play, and they had a homecoming dinner, and they had these cards coming out, and it was like a little girl dancing in like a Indian or Native American costume or whatever, and there's a sign that said, "Kill the Warriors," because our mascot for our school is Cibola Warriors, and it said, "Kill the Warriors," so it's really nice.
Oh yeah. So thank you for that story. And then, so I guess let's just have everybody, like show of hands, have you ever experienced racism at your school? Okay. So, and then have you ever experienced, I guess, racism from a fellow student? And what about from a teacher? And then I guess, kind of going away from your schools, have you ever experienced racism in general? Raise your hand.
Hi, my name is Zane. Just talk about the experience I've had. The experience I had is just like in general walking into like a convenience store and getting stopped by a certain security guard because I look shady apparently, or I look threatening in a way. I don't really understand that, but one time when I was at a gas station, I was going to go buy a pack of gum, and when I was leaving the aisle that had the gum, a security guard stopped me and he had his hand on his gun. And he was asking if I was going to pay for it, and he asked me to empty my pockets. The only thing I had was my wallet, my phone, and the gum. That just kind of like, it freaked me out, but at the same time, like I already knew this was going to happen because the youngest I experienced that was, I want to say 9. Because at school I would get picked on by like different people, like students, the lunch ladies, or like other people. So it's just like a thing, like I know that I have to experience, and it really sucks knowing I have to do that.
My name is Joshua Zango, and I'm from Twice-Bay Community School. I haven't really experienced something like that because we go to where the majority is like Native students. So, but outside of school, some less experience.
Good afternoon, my name is Cibola High School. I come from San Pedro Pueblo, and I attend Bernardo School. So a couple of my peers attended the roundhouse, and one of my peers had made a comment on why he had to say excuse me while the other man did it, because I guess he was trying to get through something. And in a way that made him feel like he was less respected as who he was, like because he was trying to get through while we could say white man didn't want to acknowledge the fact that he wanted to get through. And yeah. And another thing that came up is how our community, like within our pueblo, each like kid brings down each other for the color of their skin. And like within our community, that's really bad too because we have our own like community members bringing down each other. And in a way, that's racism within ourselves. Because in the end, we're all one, and we all need to come together and support each other. And another thing is how we talked about is how our family members would like us to remarry each other in the public. And that's another thing that is kind of racism right there because we all have like our own beliefs and what we want. But again, we have to respect our families and what we prefer.
Hello everybody, my name is Colin. I'm from the Hajj Community School and I'm the Hajj Prince. And I came here because I never had experience of no racial, but the only thing I heard like on the news is about Navajo young teens and young girls getting raped or killed or kidnapped from their own family or their own nation.
Hi, my name is Nick. I'm from Pueblo, and I don't really experience any like racist things that happen to me. I get made fun of sometimes because I'm lighter than most people from the Pueblo, and so it's kind of been a roadblock for me. But it doesn't really make me feel any way because I'm still like participating in my culture and doing the things that I love to do and helping out.
Does anybody else want to reflect on, maybe being lighter skin or anything? Because I think that the root of that is kind of faux racism instead of like colonialism and things like that. Because I grew up, I got that a lot. Okay, but I just kind of want to talk about that a little bit because I think we've been taught that for so long. That's kind of us reflecting the system that we're in right now. So I think that's one of those things that it is a form of racism because when you really break it down to that, we've been taught these things over the last like 200 years.
I'm Michelle Garcia. I'm from Santa Ana Pueblo, or I'm from Mayame, and I'm part from my Pueblo, and then on my mom's side, I'm part Hispanic. But I used to get comments a lot that like I was lighter than most of my peers, and I'm like, that doesn't make me any less different. I still carried on the traditions and the genes through who my father was, and I'm very proud of that. might not be full, but he's still a part of me, and this tradition and culture is still carried on, and I'm going to carry that on too. And I have experienced racism within my own family. I have a half brother, and we got into a fight one time, and he called me a bunch of things, but the one that stood out to me the most was he called me a clay eater, and I've never heard that before. But I burst into tears. I started crying. I felt disappointed in like who I was, and there's no reason for me to feel that way because. Sorry. There's no reason for me to feel that way because I'm happy with who I am and who I've become. And being Native just brings more light into my life and more tradition and more spirituality and more to believe in.
Hello, I'm Demetrius Johnson. When I used to go to school here at UNM, I was part of Kiva Club, and we pushed to have Indigenous Peoples Day recognized and also to abolish the racist UNM seal. But during my time here, just a part of those two campaigns, it was 2 years ago, Milo Yiannopoulos was going to present at campus, and this was like a UNM-backed event, and us as Kiva Club and like a bunch of other student organizations, we didn't want this person speaking because he uses like a lot of hate speech, hateful rhetoric, especially against people of color specifically, and marginalized people. So we tried to stop him from talking here in this building, actually here in this room. And when a large group of us, mostly black and brown bodies, covered this whole area outside, what UNM responded with was police presence. They came with police on horses, riot police, and they tear gassed us, and they brutalized us, and they arrested us. And coming from UNM, we knew like that, that had like a lot of like racial implications. Like they will protect a white person talking or spreading like hateful rhetoric, and they would arrest brown and black bodies. But just like that one incident at UNM, like beyond like having dorm names named after Bosque Redondo, or even having building names named after like conquistadors and people that have brutalized their people, like UNM's like a racist institution. And like I graduated, I graduated here, I went to school here, and that's how I experienced racism here at my time at UNM.
So thank you everyone for sharing. I heard a lot of familiar stories from people, whether it was experiencing racism in your school, just being out in the world, even from your own family. And I think Demetrius brought up a really interesting story. I'll just share a story from when I was a student here at the University of New Mexico. And I had a friend who was a graduate student with me. He was an older Dene man. And we would often sit out on the grass over there. There's a little grassy knoll, and we'd eat our lunch. And every time we would sit out there, the security guards would come out and try to kick him off the grounds because they said that he looked like a homeless person. And this happened like every single time we were out there. And it got to the point where it was like, he just didn't even care. He was just like, whatever. But I know that even though he was resilient and whatever, I know that each of those instances built up over time, right? And they do hurt, and you do feel something, right? From it. And the one thing that I can tell you as somebody who grew up in a predominantly white high school where it wasn't cool to be Indian, my high school I graduated from actually banned the singing of our Lakota honor songs. So we can't even celebrate, and to this day it's that way too, right? they call it the Deep South, and in the South we call it the Deep North, where I'm from, Lakota. And I have my tongue over here, Lewis, he can tell you all about it. That experience, you know, we kind of say, oh, well, it doesn't really bother me, but it does. It adds up over time and it accumulates, right? It's not something where when we think of like, when we say the words like white supremacy, it's not just a bunch of guys running around in white sheets, right? Chasing people. But it's those instances when you're just trying to eat a meal and go about your daily lives when something happens, right? Where they call security on you, right? Where somebody says something to you, and it's meant to hurt, right? And it's not something that is spectacular, like burning crosses on somebody's yard or anything like that, but it's those small instances that build up over time, right? And they're effective, right? In the sense that racism isn't just about controlling our behaviors as Indigenous people, as people of color, as oppressed and marginalized people, but it's also about controlling the behaviors of those white people as well, right? And that's what I always tell people. It's like settler colonialism, racism is a white person's problem before it's a Native person's problem, right? Or it's the person who's the racist, it's their problem before it's our problem. And it's a system, right? It's not something, you know, as anyone in this room can tell you who's a professor, it doesn't just disappear once you get a degree, once you make a little bit more money, but it continues on, right? There are people that I work with, my own colleagues, that won't even call me a doctor, even though that I earned that piece of paper and the right to be called a doctor, because they don't see me as an equal, right? But that's the society we live in. And you know, it's one thing to tell these stories, but it's another thing to do something about it, right? And I think Amanda brought up a really powerful story about what happens when we do get together. And we do challenge these structures, right? Because things, you know, in our lives are always telling us not to stand up and not to take, you know, matters into our own hands or to defend people. And I can tell you right now that I've seen, you know, the most everyday people do extraordinary things by either standing up for what they believe in what, you know, what's right? And oftentimes they don't even experience the benefit of that, right? So when Demetrius and Jennifer were talking about doing the SEAL campaign and abolishing the SEAL, a lot of those students went on and graduated, and they didn't even, you know, they still had the racist SEAL on their diplomas, and they didn't get to experience all the changes that happened, right? Because they went and moved on. And so oftentimes the people who are making the changes get singled out and they don't get to experience the benefit of it. But as we know as Indigenous people, right, our ancestors went through hard times so that we could be here, right? And so that we could be having these conversations because they knew they were forward-thinking people, right? They always say, oh, you guys live in the past. I was like, man, we're from the future, man. We're thinking like generations ahead all the time. We think 7 generations in advance, that's our people, right? And so we realize that we may not get it right in our lifetime, but isn't it selfish to think that one person in their single lifetime can change the world? But that these things actually, you know, we're making good relations, not just with people here on this planet right now, but people who are going to be here on this planet in the future, right? And so that's what this change is all about. It's not just about, you know, whether we're going to stop a pipeline today, you know, it's about how our people are going to live in the future, right? And that's part of stopping that pipeline, or that's part of getting a racist teacher fired from the university or the high school, where it's about implementing curriculum, right? Because education is a future-oriented project. You know, I'm a historian and I talk a lot about the past, but we have to learn, you know, where we were and where we're at before we can actually decide where we're going to go in the future, right? And so I hope this was enlightening for me, and I just want to pass the mic on to the other facilitators who might have some things to reflect on.
Thank you, Dr. Estes. So when I was in high school way back, I was born yet, my high school was a typical public high school on the Navajo Nation, but it was run by the Arizona, State Department. So an example of racism that I think I experienced that I didn't really recognize till I went to college was that my classmates and I, which was 100% or 99% Navajo students never saw our own history in our curriculum, never saw our own voice, our own perspective in what we were learning in school. It wasn't until I went to college and read books like Blackout Speaks and read authors like Vine Deloria Jr. and realized and gained a critical consciousness, like this awareness of, wow, our people experienced the long walk, but we didn't even learn about that history in my own school. And then when I was telling you about earlier how I went and did some research with high school students about 10 years ago, I remember a conversation with one girl saying, we learn about the Civil War happening, and at the very same time, the Long Walk was happening, and it's just kind of was a light bulb for her, like, why aren't we learning about that part of history as well? So I think, it's important to recognize how racism can be depicted in subtle ways and how what you learn in school, whose perspective is it, what counts as knowledge, whose history counts, what are you tested on in schools that they think is important and valuable. I think it's one of the big reasons I became a high school teacher when I had this awareness, and one of the big reasons now I'm in Native American Studies. And that's a place where I think, a lot of you have the benefit of good teachers who share a curriculum and a perspective with you that you see yourself in. And it's important that you realize as students, you can demand that education as you go on to college. You can demand that from your professors and whatever, don't be afraid to voice who you are. As a lot of you did today, I'm really thankful and appreciative of a lot of you standing up and speaking and saying, telling your story. And it's hard to do that in front of a lot of strangers. So thank you for that, and just wish the best for you.
Sorry, how about this whole notes thing? But basically, what I came here to address is like how much crap EPS is. Because growing up, like she said, I didn't really learn much about my people. And I think the only history I remember for Navajos is the Navajo Code Talkers. And it was weird to me because in a history book of like 500 pages about white people, or about America, there was probably about 5 pages only on Native American people. And I would really want that to change because as I was little and like still growing up, I really liked history. It's not because, I always got mad at it though, which is kind of weird, but I liked it because it reflected my history too, but not the kind of history that I like to learn, because there's a lot of things that I had problems with, especially with the way we were taught about us, is like the wrong ways, Saying things like, oh, they were savages, oh, they wanted wars, they did all these raids on other tribes. But it's not all of us. It isn't our whole story, which I'm kind of pissed about because there's a lot more to us than what they see us as, or what they saw us in history. And but I really appreciate you guys telling your story because I know how nerve-wracking it is. Like the first time I talked about what happened at Cibola, it was more, what gave me the courage to speak up, I guess, was the fact that I didn't want anyone to feel the way I did when this happened. And hearing your stories breaks my heart because I do realize that the system does need change and that all of us deserve a lot better than how we're being treated, especially out in public. All these Vilaganas need to learn is just learn more about our history, learn the correct history, and racism will be solved, it won't totally be solved because there's always going to be people who are going to talk about it in a negative way, but education is kind of key to learning about what to say and what not to say to
My
others.
comments are really brief. I just wanted to say, hearing all of you today gave me so much hope for the future. And like Nick said, if we want to understand our history, we need to understand where we're going. And I think a lot of us become like really, like we kind of just focus in on like what elders think and say is the end all be all. But we need to remember the ways that they've been hurt and the ways that they've taken up maybe negative attitudes or beliefs for their survival. A lot of them went through boarding school and were exposed to these things. And I know at the table I was with, we talked about how sometimes elders will perpetuate racism and be really exclusionary to people in our communities, even within our own families. But you all understand that we can't carry that on. And you all understand that if we want our cultures and our language and our traditions to survive, we need to make some pretty big changes. And we also understand that although some things are framed as traditional, like sometimes racist attitudes or sexist attitudes, that they really aren't. And it's our obligation as young people that if we want to protect ourselves, we need to undo those things. And we need to really make this effort to work through these uncomfortable thoughts and feelings and have those conversations amongst ourselves. And you all already understand that. And so instead of looking at how things have been in the past and how the ones who've come before us might still embody some of these negative things, I've just given a lot more hope. And I know that if it's you all leading the way, we're going to be fine.
Again, just like you all said, you know, you guys make me proud. I was like very happy to hear your stories. You know, and I just also want to say, like, when I was younger, I was really shy. I'm still actually really shy. I'm just a shy person, you know. And I was so shy, like I couldn't even speak up in class, you know, and the teacher would call me and be like, my heart was pounding, my palms get sweaty, you know. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't want to say anything. But I think over time, you know, this sort of work and learning more about our culture and our traditions, that's really brought out a lot in me. It's given me a lot of courage, and talking with my peers and meeting other people, looking to my role models, it's really helped me a lot throughout the years. So I encourage you guys to keep practicing that. Your voice is so important. You know, what you have to say is super important. We want to hear it. You know, I'm older now, so I want to hear what you guys have to say. And, you know, people in the Native community, we really value our youth, you know, and what you guys have a lot of power. So keep speaking up. I encourage you to keep doing that. And you can make mountains move, and you can make people move. You can make change happen. You are the power in our community. So keep that up.
I just want to echo, it's tough to go after all of these really great voices. Everybody said everything that I was kind of thinking about, but I'm really inspired to hear your stories because, you know, 10 years ago or so when I was in high school, these were things that I wasn't thinking about. And sometimes I was thinking about them, but I was also really scared to talk about them. I grew up in a border town, and it's not a good thing to be a native in a border town, so sometimes it really impacted how I thought about my identity because I was scared to talk about these things. And so I'm sorry I went around and forced people to speak, but I really want to encourage people to talk about these things because if we want to challenge the system, if we want to get our voices heard, we have to speak out. And so I encourage all of you just to keep fighting and keep speaking.